Hi everyone, Brexit. So, as I explained to the British public last year, and this document, this is a WordPress document, we'll do it in the, basically I explained that there was going to be no agreement with America, no trade deal with America. In considering the proposed USA deal, Parliament cannot ignore the fact that there is as yet no deal with America, that Congress is committed to blocking that deal in event of a hard Brexit, imposing a hard border across Ireland, scrapping the Good Friday Agreement, and the fact that Britain on leaving the EU will instantly lose all of the 168 deals we have with other nations via EU membership. So here we have Nancy Pelosi. This is a press conference now explaining in no uncertain terms that America values the Good Friday Agreement and they stand by it, and there is absolutely no way that they are going to do anything to disrupt that deal, and they are not going to do a trade deal with Britain if the Good Friday Agreement is being disrupted, if there are any risks against that. So that means, and it's Congress, not Trump, it's Congress that decides these things about trade deals, okay? So according to American Congress, which is largely Democrat controlled at the moment and is likely to remain that way, there is going to be no deal with America. And the Good Friday Agreement is an international treaty, and it is absolutely despicable that this Tory government, and with May and their coalition with the DUP, who are very pro-loyalist, Irish loyalist, that they have manipulated Brexit, exploited it in order to restore troubles in Northern Ireland, and they're at it already. You know, it's all over the media. IRA. We've not heard of the IRA in decades, but then suddenly, oh, the IRA is all over the media. They're stirring up antagonism within British military by prosecuting retired members of the British Army that served in Northern Ireland, suddenly pulling them out of retirement and hauling them up before the courts on charges of crimes that they're alleged to have committed while in service in Northern Ireland. This is all designed to reignite animosity and angst on both sides. They are playing us like nobody's business. They're really ramping up the divides here. And Congress has said no anyway, that they're not. So there's no trade deal. So Britain, things are looking very, very serious, you see, because everything you buy online, everything you buy from the shops, everything you get from your doctor through prescriptions, everything you get from your vets for your pets through prescriptions, your pet food, your gardening stuff, your clothes, everything all arrives in Britain through the 168 trade deals that Europe has with the rest of the world. We get access to all the goods from the rest of the world through the trade deals that we have with the EU. Now, people wanted to leave the EU, fair enough, but nobody gives up on their trade agreements, you see. America has got a trade agreement with the EU. Israel has a trade agreement with the EU, and yet both these nations have been supporting Britain abandoning our trade deal with the EU. Why? It's one thing about leaving Europe and not getting the funds and not having the freedom of movement and blah blah blah, not having rule from Brussels, but there's quite another thing when you're pulling out of the EU and you're leaving people with no food, no medicines, mass shortages for how long, when it takes at least 5 years for trade agreements to be established. and that all the prices of all the goods are going to rise. How much? Because we'll be paying world trade tariff agreements. Britain's a very small nation. We're not buying on bulk as an EU collective, as part of the EU collective. I mean, basically what you're looking at, it's like, say for example, one of the American states turning round and saying, right, that's it, we're going independent from the rest of the United States, and then having to sort out all different trade deals with other countries because they're a separate country now, and they have no trade deal with any nation. That's basically the situation that Britain is now in. Is that what people voted for? Did people vote to become an isolated island in the whole world, that we've got no trade deals with anybody virtually? I mean, can Israel feed Britain and provide Britain with all the food and medicines and all the goods that we use every year? No, they can't. Can Japan? No, they can't. It's impossible. So we are literally heading towards the edge of a cliff. And no trade deal with America. And this Good Friday Agreement is sacrosanct. It cannot. And I explained to the EU and this was last May, which was proposals for cancelling Article 50. We explained in no uncertain terms about what was going on with the Good Friday Agreement and how it is that Northern Ireland had voted to stay in the EU. Now, because Northern Ireland has voted to stay in the EU, and Southern Ireland is, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is actually an EU member, then in the eyes of the EU, there can be no border across Ireland, because the people on both sides are EU citizens, and the people, part of Northern Ireland, had voted to stay in the EU. I think it was a 62% vote in favour of staying in the EU. It probably would have been higher if turnout had been greater, and if people realised that they were going to use Brexit to scrap the Good Friday Agreement. It probably would have been a lot higher. But it doesn't matter. They voted to stay in the EU. So who is Britain then to come along and say, oh no, you're out of the EU because England's voted to stay in to leave the EU. Wales has voted to leave the EU. Oh, Scotland voted to stay in the EU, but never mind, they're going to join in. But Scotland isn't joined to another nation that is also an EU nation. Scotland hasn't got a Good Friday Agreement with that other nation. You see, it just cannot happen. Legally, it can't happen. Legally, the EU has to stand by the people of both sides of the border. They have to honour an international treaty. And scrapping the Good Friday Agreement, sorry, no, this is absolutely outrageous, and it's putting how many people's lives at risk. It's basically an excuse to restore martial law to Ireland that Ireland was living under for how many years, until that Good Friday Agreement ended the Troubles. And it's noticeable that the Troubles kicked off the moment Britain joined the EU and Ireland joined it. I mean, I think Ireland was already a member of the EU at that point. But anyway, it was around the same time that the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, we all became part of the EU along with Britain. And then it was like, well, soft borders, you see, because that's what being part of the EU gives, freedom of movement. And that was precisely exactly when the Troubles started. Go back in history and have a look. And I have shared it in the proposal, explained exactly when the Troubles started. And it was around the time that borders were being softened as part of the EU membership. And basically the loyalists wanted to keep that hard border there, because they were saying, oh, they're sending terrorists in, and suddenly the whole thing kicked off. And we don't know to what extent You know, that situation was manufactured in order to maintain a hard border across Ireland, but a lot of people suffered on both sides, and it was horrific. And we cannot go back to that. And this is what I mean about evil, right? That a government has to be competent. A government has to understand. They know what they are doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, then they've got no right to be in government. And I will say that none of these ministers that are presently governing Britain have any degree of competence enough to warrant running a nation. They're a lot of them charlatans. They've literally robbed our NHS. I mean, robbed our NHS of £100 billion. 100 billion, 2/3 of the NHS budget to test people for a virus that has a at most 0.6% fatality risk. And, you know, that's the people aged over 60 with underlying health conditions. The average general public citizen under the age of 50, you're looking at a 0.3% risk at the highest. And children, it is extremely low. And the amount of stress and trauma, and the media has been hyping up the whole thing, you know, and the Democrats, they're all at it in America the same with this thing. But, you know, amazingly, thankfully, they are standing by the Good Friday Agreement. And I think that we need a second referendum now because of and it needs to be monitored by external bodies. And also Britain's recent GE, the postal vote, that needs now investigating as well. I think we need external monitors, UN rapporteurs basically, to come and check on Britain's voting system, because it's actually Venezuela has a far more secure voting system than Britain, described by Forbes as an example to the world, right? So, you know, all this stuff about, you know, the present president of Venezuela is there on a dodgy election. It isn't true. Venezuela's elections are far more secure than Britain's. And the postal vote, it is outrageous when you think the government has privatised the postal service, that probably, I know there's been research into it, there's a lot of connections between the private sale and ownership of the post office and Tory government ministers. That not only that, they privatised the managing and counting of the postal vote. And again, they have connections to Tory ministers. This whole thing reeks of corruption. Somebody's coming to our country, tearing up our laws, tearing up our constitution, tearing up the Good Friday Agreement, telling us all, oh, don't worry, you know, it's going to be like wartime. You're all going to be on rations. Military law, talking about military law, stockpiling body bags. Oh, and then let's throw a pandemic into the mix as well. People, rise up, stand up for your rights. I keep explaining that. Get up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Don't give up. Suicides have risen, 100%, not just in Britain but throughout Europe, where the countries have had these lockdowns. People are getting sick through the stress is lowering people's immunity. The more stress you impose on people, the more susceptible people are to every kind of virus. We need to get on the ball with the facts and information. We need to understand that what is going on is a global takeover. It's the new world order that George Bush Sr. was talking about how many years ago. Look what's going on with Israel and Palestine and the Greater Israel Project. And all of it being ignored, the repeated merciless bombing of Gaza over alleged balloons carrying incendiary devices, travelling across Israeli fields, you know, sending the fighter jets and the bombs and bomb families, bomb children. Of course, Congress is going to ignore that. They are going to stand by the Good Friday Agreement. America has a huge Irish population that identify as Irish, okay? And there will be hell to pay among those if that Good Friday Agreement is scrapped. So, you know, she's got to stand up and say something. Because there's going to be masses of people out complaining. So Britain, it is not looking good, you know. I think if people want to leave the EU, that's fair enough, but I don't think that should mean giving up our trade deals. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we're not going to be trading with the nations on our doorstep. You know, you can have trade deals with nations. It doesn't mean that that nation owns your country. America has trade deals with countries all over the world. Most countries do, that are standing independent. They might have issues with those various countries, but it doesn't mean that they chop the trade deal, they cut off their trade deals. Britain needs to see sense. It isn't a renegading on Brexit by having a trade deal. The only thing that this government has to do to secure a trade deal with the EU is promise to honour the Good Friday Agreement, promise to uphold our human rights that we had before we entered the EU, by the way, to promise to uphold workers' rights that we had before we entered the EU, promise to uphold health and safety regulations and environmental protections that we had before we entered the EU. Why is it that these Tories think, oh, once we're out of the EU, we can just scrap everything? We don't need environmental protection. We don't need health and safety regulations on food and medicines. You know, we don't need human rights. We don't need workers' rights. We had those before we entered the EU. Britain created most of them before the EU was even conceived of as a unified trade bloc. We're talking about trade here. We're talking about people's lives. How are you going to cope? What's going to happen to our hospitals? Why is nobody asking questions about 2/3 of the NHS budget being spent on actually useless tests that are not testing specifically for COVID-19, that have a very high percentage rate of false positives? And meanwhile, the British people are being told that they're on a 7 or 10 year waiting list for vital operations and treatments. People who've been denied healthcare during lockdowns. This is, you know, I would go so far as to say that the kind of Brexit that these Tories are delivering is an act of war. And that's why I didn't vote for it. I'd be happy for Britain to be an independent nation like we were before we entered the EU. But unfortunately, that is not going to be the Britain after we've left the EU. You know, and here I've shared intel for Brexit, you know, and you need to read it. Okay, the British people, you need to know. You need to know about this government, about the Tories and the Blairites before them, and the Tories before them. I mean, let's face it, we've been governed by Tories for how long now? And you need to read what has been going on, that the BBC and Sky and all the news medias haven't bothered to cover. Okay, the stuff exposed by men like Gordon Bowden, God rest his soul, who sadly recently died. He's passed away, but the work that he did remains, and it's very important, and it is shared here. And people, you need to read it. You need to get with the facts. This isn't about immigration. It isn't about being controlled by Brussels. It's about the Good Friday Agreement. It's about our trade. It's about people's lives and welfare and rights. It's about rights for our environment. It's about rights for animals. It's about health and safety of the products and medicines that we use. So, you know, what can I say? I mean, there is going to be no trade deal with the USA anytime soon, because I do believe that this government is going to scrap the Good Friday Agreement, that because they are criminal and they're happy to break international law. You know, they're standing with Israel when Israel says that, you know, they're at liberty to ignore every law in the world. They're above the law. And yes, they can legislate anywhere in the world and is entitled to violate the sovereignty of foreign countries and allowed to ignore the directives of the international law in any field that they desire. And it seems that Britain is following the same path. Well, what is Britain? Is Britain Boris Johnson and his motley crew? Or is Britain the people? As a democracy, Britain is the people. As a sovereignty, a sovereign nation, the sovereignty under a democracy falls to the people. It is up to us, we the people, to stand up for our rights, regardless of whether you voted Tory or Labour or whether you voted Brexit or to remain. It doesn't make no difference. When your human rights are on the line, you stand up for them. Pandemic or no pandemic should be allowed to erase our human rights. None whatsoever. Unless you're dealing with something as deadly as Ebola, for which there is now a treatment, then you do mass testing immediately. That's what should have been done. But Britain now is in the grip of horror, because on the one side we've got all the COVID protocols, all based on a dodgy premise, and on the other side we've got all the Brexit stuff, again based on a dodgy premise of a dodgy referendum. And I personally am sick to death of it. I'm sick to death of these Tories. Since they've been in, we've been under attack. I was sick to death of the last Labour government under Tony Blair. Never voted for years because of all of them. All of them are corrupt. It is up to we the people to stand up for our rights. I think Jeremy Corbyn was our best hope. I do believe that we were robbed. And, you know, looking at the postal votes, we were robbed. The manipulated postal votes. And it's all broken down here to show how it was the postal votes that swung Johnson's landslide victory, that he's able to be doing the things that he's doing without any viable challenge from Parliament, because he holds an 80-seat majority. How did he get to that from having, what was it? He didn't even have a majority in Parliament, but after a general election, suddenly he owns Parliament. And we've got the evidence there about the postal vote. And now they're threatening the peace in Northern Ireland. People, look, I have hope. I have faith, you see. Keep the faith. I have faith in my fellow humanity that sense and sanity is going to rise from all walks of life among the general public, that we're going to lose the illusions of divisions between us. At the end of the day, regardless of what colour we are, what faith we are, what politics we are all human beings, and we all have a right to move forward. We have a right to progress in a spirit of love, compassion, sense and sanity, facts, not fiction. And when the government is proposing certain facts towards us and we can prove that what they're saying is actually an exaggeration to the extent that they're feeding us fictions, That's when we need to know that the future is not secure. Our nation is not secure. This is a national security issue that they propose to basically deal with through martial law. Threaten and attack the people who have been threatened, are being threatened and attacked by the fictitious and xenophobic narratives that are coming from our governments, who are serving who? Who are they serving? They're not serving we the people. They're not serving sense and sanity. They're serving an agenda written by people who are so far removed from reality. They have no right to be dictating the reality of our lives because they have no understanding of it. They're dangerous people, and they have created and are promoting equally dangerous and deadly technology, be it 5G or biotech, gene editing, vaccines and treatments. When our very DNA is under threat here, we need to ask some serious questions, not just, oh yes, of course we believe what the government's saying. We were born with intelligence. We have free will. We have the right of autonomy, the right to think for ourselves, the right to ask questions. And Jesus explained to us the way to the kingdom of heaven is to be like a little child. And what does a little child do? Fearlessly asks questions. Ask the questions, people. Stand up for your rights.